Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I've been doing a lot of thinking and a little bit of reading about what is historical fiction anyways. I always find definitions and delving into trying to define something as large and amorphous as historical fiction, the genre of historical fiction, trying to define that and bring shape to it, I find that really interesting. So if you're curious about historical fiction like I am, I hope that you'll enjoy this like kind of niche deep dive into this topic. And if you're new, just know that I'm Shelly. I love to read and I love reading historical fiction. So if you're enjoying the vibe, maybe subscribe. The most important thing is that we're hanging out. And without any further rambling on, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. I started off with the Historical Novel Society and the way that they're defining historical fiction. I mean, they are the Historical Novel Society, which has a ton of reviews, tons and tons and tons of historical fiction reviews, which is wonderful. So, their definition is to be deemed historical, in our sense, a novel must be written at least 50 years after the events described, or written by someone who was not alive at the time of those events, and therefore approaches them only by research. We also consider the following styles of novel to be historical fiction for our purposes. Alternative histories, such as Robert Harris's Fatherland. That surprised me. Actually, all of these novels quite surprised me. Pseudo-histories in the style of Umberto Eco's Island of the Day Before. So, like, I looked it up. Let me think. Pseudo-histories are like false histories, intentionally false histories, the misinterpretation or distortion of a historical record. They think that is historical fiction. Time-slip novels such as Barbara Erskine's Lady of Hay, which I think a more modern example would be Diana Gabaldon's Outlander series. Historical fantasies such as Bernard Cornwell's King Arthur trilogy. I wonder what they would say about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is a historical fantasy written by Susanna Clarke that has a lot of fantasy, like straight up magic happening. Whereas I don't know if Cornwell's King Arthur trilogy has straight up magic. I don't know much about that trilogy though. All right, and then also multiple time novels. I mean, multiple like plot lines that are of different time periods, such as Michael Cunningham's The Hours, which I believe has a more modern timeline, and then there are two more historical timelines, and so that would be an example. Okay, so I'm like that is extremely broad. I think one of the things that kind of makes me bristle a little bit is the fact that there's this or in their definition. So it says that the novel must be written at least 50 years after the events described, or written by someone who was not yet alive at the time of those events. So I think one thing that makes me sort of pause, or I'm wrestling with it, is that let's say a 25-year-old puts out a debut and she sets her novel in the 90s. And so in 2025, that means that she would be, if she was a 25-year-old person, she would have been born in the 2000s, meaning that the 1990s is historical to her. So I think, I think that kind of bothers me, and I don't know. But then if we kind of turn the definition around on itself, there's something I very much agree with, which is that if somebody is 90 years old in 2025 and they set their book in the 1970s, which is more than 50 years in the past, it's still within the author's living memory. And so perhaps using living memory to describe those events, I don't know if, I don't think that should be counted as historical fiction. So, it's these little nuances that I feel like I struggle with. But yeah, I think it just really, I don't know. I really pause and I struggle with, again, like the young writer writing about something incredibly modern. Um, Even though they would have to research entirely, they're not relying on their own living memory, but it's only 35 years in the past. I don't know. But then I don't want to be a stickler, although I love definitions. So, as you can see, I'm wrestling with it. So then I went to a video that Steve Donahue did. Steve Donahue is a YouTuber, a book critic, reviewer, and has been for many decades. And he did a historical fiction master list, which if I have my stuff together, I will leave all of these resources linked down below so that you can give them a gander yourself. So Steve Donahue, he's also, he likes to think about these things as well. So he shared a definition, though I don't think it is in any way comprehensive. But what he was saying, just to give some shape to his list, his master list of historical fiction, was that when he was working for, I think it was Historical Novel Society, though I could be wrong, but I'm like 90% sure, that the definition that he had to consider when he was reviewing for them was that the book has to be more than 50% of the book has to be set more than 50 or more years in the past. Okay, let me say that again. More than 50% of the book has to take place 50 years or more in the past, like 50, you know what I'm saying. Oh my gosh, I'm just tripping over my words. So that was like the broadest definition. Then it's defined down a little bit. The setting should take place before the lifetime of the author. So instead of the or the setting has to take place before the lifetime of the author, I think his is an and the setting has to take place before the lifetime of the author. So if you are an aged author, your historical fiction needs to be set further and further into the past, right? The point of the book should evoke the past. It's not just a setting. So this means that all historical romances, all westerns, all historical mysteries, those are out, because the point of those books are to be an adventure story, to romanticize the past in some way, whether it be a western or a romance, or to be the setting of an intricate mystery, right? So sort of a facet to that point is that the historical setting has to be the point of the book. So we're immersed in it so that we can learn more about even whether it be the customs and manners of that period, or to explore a specific historical event. That the setting has to be the point, right? So it doesn't mean that it has to be dramatic, but whether you're like I'm reading a book about the Brontes. It's a historical fiction about the Brontes, and it's about understanding that period and their struggle within that period, at least the sisters of that period, and being a woman in the Victorian period in England, and how difficult that could be, especially when you have aspirations to be independent and to be a writer, right? So that is the point. Like, the historical setting is the point. And then that the history has to be the point of the book, so there's no time travel books. So time slip novels are out. So that means all the Diana Gabaldon or Barbara Erskine's novel, those are out. And then no myths. No books based off myth. There's not enough historical information to make those books there's not enough history to base those books off of. I like this. I like the shaping of this definition, and I thought that I quite enjoyed listening to Steve make this point. And basically, when the Historical Novel Society, that when they say we consider the following styles of novel also historical fiction for our purposes, basically Steve went in and he was like, and all of these definitions are out. So I thought that was fascinating. And then I read an article linked by the Historical Novel Society by Emma Darwin, and she has all these different bullet points of what makes it what makes historical fiction. And for the most part, she aligns with the Historical Novel Society quite a bit, but she brings up a couple of points that I thought were interesting. And the main one was this: fiction that explores history as a process, that then she says that one of the earliest critics of the genre, which is Gabriel Lucas, argues that it's inarguable that a historical novel must include real historical events and at least one real historical character, although he agrees with Rose Tremaine, who is a writer, that the main character must be fictional. And I was like, really? So, that is fascinating. That the main character must be fictional. Now, do they mean the fictionalization of a main character? I don't know, because some of my favorite historical fiction novels, I'm mostly thinking of Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, that Thomas Cromwell is a fictionalization. It is a true imaginative reimagining of Cromwell within that book. But Cromwell was a living, breathing person. So I was like, that is a really odd little sticking point right there. So I don't really know how I feel about that argument that certain people bring in, that the main character needs to be fictional. Okay, so then the last one is, actually I went to Wikipedia, and so it kind of goes through the same thing as the rest. Historical fiction is a literary genre in which the historical plot takes place in a setting of particular real historical events. Although the term is commonly used for literature, it can also be applied to many other forms of art, such as, television, video games, plays, graphic novels, and so on. So one of the things that I thought was interesting was an essential element of historical fiction is that it is set in the past and pays attention to the manners, social customs, and other details of the depicted period. And here's what kind of was a little click for me, was that I think sometimes I've read novels and I'm thinking of, oh my gosh, what the lady who wrote Hamnet, she wrote, I gotta look it up. Maggie O'Farrell, who wrote Hamnet, also wrote The Marriage Portrait. Now, I've been meaning to read Hamnet for years, and I still do want to read it, but I did read The Marriage Portrait, which is about a 16th century princess, I believe, 17th century princess. Anyways, obviously set in the past. And her name is Lucrezia, and there's this portrait of her. It's very beautiful. And what's interesting is that the character of Lucrezia, she is fiercely independent on her own, that she wants to break out of this marriage and she wants a life for herself. And it was mentioned by another booktuber, Britta Bowler, who said that is so historically inaccurate of these motives. It was such a modern take on Lucrezia that it was so implausible. And that it really threw Britta off. And after Britta made that critique, it really threw the novel into a new light for myself. And I was thinking that in terms of this Wikipedia article, that it pays attention to the manners, social customs, and other details of the depicted period. And so to make that character of The Marriage Portrait and of other readings, right, so modern that it really is breaking the rules of historical fiction, that really one needs to be more sensitive to the time period, that if you're really going to go into that time period, you can't just put so many modern sensibilities into that character. And I'm not necessarily critiquing that novel in particular, but I do think that that's something to pay attention to, that we really should get into the mind and head, and so many other writers do it so well, that we get into the mind and the head of the person, and thus being sensitive to our own modern sensibilities while we're reading historical fiction. I hope that made sense. So I think that we don't want to confuse and to just take, to think it is okay that you can set something in a historical time period, but the character is supremely modern, and that it is, and in a way, so much so that it is incongruous to the to the period itself. Now, I do think that there could have been a way to write a modern character, but to be a little more sensitive to the social customs and manners of the time. That it could be this desire of independence, but maybe it's a little less modern, a little less intensely sort of 21st century modern sensibilities. So I thought that was really interesting as well. Anyways, that is it. These are all the things that have been swimming around in my brain for days and days. And I was excited to just sit down and talk to you today about it. So yeah, that's it for me. Let me know, did I miss something in terms of historical fiction? I mean, also, I just want to say that, like, do I think that, like, historical fantasy, should it be called just fantasy, or should it be called historical fantasy? Yeah, I think it should be called historical fantasy because that's what it is. But it is like a subgenre of historical fiction, and that the umbrella of historical fiction can have all these subgenres that have these little nuances and tweaks. But if we're just thinking about strictly historical fiction, maybe it's a little more narrow than what the Historical Novel Society has said. Or maybe it is just super broad, and then everything else is just little nuances underneath. But I do think that there's maybe a purity out there. There are works of literature that are in some ways like pure historical fiction, and that's one way of thinking about it. And then there are all these nuanced genres underneath. I don't know. Anyways, perhaps you can all think about this with me, share your ideas, but mostly just thanks for being here. I really appreciate you, and I hope to see you all in my next one. Bye!